Okay. All right, let's go back. Okay, take two. Let's try again. This that's nice. Cheers, and the parsha that we read this year, this Shabbos, is of course parshat Beshalach, which talks about Kriyat Yamsuf. And after Kriyat Yamsuf, we have a story of what happens to Bnei Yisrael as they begin to travel after having witnessed the great miracle of the splitting of the sea, drowning of all the Egyptians. Immediately, we pick up the story immediately after that with this very short story about the arrival at a place that is going to be called Marah. So it tells us Vayasa Moshe Yisrael Miyamsuf, that Moshe again leads the Bnei Yisrael. Vayasa is a very strange word. It does not appear elsewhere in the Torah, but it means somebody causing somebody else to travel. It's not a normal usage. We would have said Bnei Yisrael would have traveled. The normal thing is they travel, but here it's Vayasa Moshe. We're going to see what the Parshanim have to say about that. From Yamsuf, they travel to Midbar Shur, and they travel 3 days in the desert, and they don't find water. So we'll get into how does that 3-day travel mean? What does it mean they didn't find water? We'll speak a little bit about that. They arrive at a place called either Maratah or Marah, and they are not able to drink the water there because the water is bitter, or because something is bitter. Kimarim Haim, they are bitter. Whether that they refers to the water or it refers to the people, again, discussion among the Parshanim. But therefore, they called the name of something Marah. The people complained to Moshe, saying, "What are we going to drink?" He calls out to Hashem. Hashem teaches him about a tree. He throws it into the water, and the waters become sweet. There Hashem placed upon him chok and mishpat, and there he tested him. Vayomer im shamoa tishma, the kol Hashem Elokecha. If you will listen to the voice of Hashem, vayosher enough and do what is upright in His eyes, v'hazan tala mitzvotav, and you will pay a heed to His mitzvot, v'shamar takul chukav, and observe all of His chukim. Kol hamachalo asher samti mitzrayim lo asim alecha, all of the machalot, all of the plagues that I placed upon the Egyptians, I will not place upon you. Ki ani Hashem rofecha, for I am Hashem who heals you. That's the short parsha that immediately, as I said, follows the crossing of the sea, the singing of this wonderful song of shiur that we're familiar with. And question is, what is the Torah telling us? Why does the Torah have this whole story about what happened, rather than just telling them what came to Marah, and then they moved on to the next place? So we start, of course, as I said, with the concept of Vayasa, that firstly Moshe had to cause them to travel. And Rashi says, what does it mean Moshe caused them to travel? He's on Bal Korcham. That Moshe had to literally drag the Jews away from the Yam Suf where they had crossed. Why? That when the Egyptians went out to chase after the Jews, after the Jews had left Egypt, they adorned their horses. In other words, they were chasing them. The cavalry was chasing them on their horses. And they adorned all of their horses with gold and silver ornaments and jewelry, precious jewelry. Why? I'm getting this puzzle look. Why would they have put gold and silver and precious jewels on their horses? The answer the Midrash there wants to suggest, but which Rashi doesn't quote and fully quote part of, is that the Egyptians looked at Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, "Let's chase after the Jews." And they said, "What, are you crazy? We just went through 10 plagues. Why are we going to chase after the Jews?" So Pharaoh says, "Come on, I'll make it worth your while. I'll give you gold. I'll give you silver. I'll give you all these jewelry." And they said, "Well, what is all that jewelry going to be?" Well, yeah, he says he'll give it to us. We'll get back. We'll kill the Jews. We'll get back, and then he'll say, "Yeah, where do you think you got your reward by killing Jews?" So they said, "No, we want payment up front." And once they got the payment up front, they didn't want to leave it at home for the police to steal while they were out killing the Jews. They went and took it with them on their horses. Nice midrash, but again, this is a midrash. This is not written anywhere in the text. It's a midrash that says that this is what the Egyptians did as they were chasing the Jews. So anyway, obviously, so what happened to all this gold and silver when they drowned and they were washed up on shore? And when they washed up on the shore where the Jews had finished crossing, they saw this gold and jewels and silver. And they weren't going to say, "Oh, well, let's leave it. Let's keep going." No, we got to stop and collect it all. Rashi tells us, based on a pasuk in shiur, that the spoils that the Jews took at the sea from all these Egyptian soldiers, all this gold, silver that was on the horses, was greater than the spoils that they left Egypt with. All remember back in when they left Egypt. Remember when they left Egypt, they borrowed gold and silver, but that was only the private gold and silver. This was all the government treasury that he emptied out to pay the soldiers with. So they got more, they made more out of that than they made out of leaving Egypt. As the pasuk says, quotes the pasuk Shirim Tarizov Naslokim Kudas that you collected gold as well as silver. Lefikach, therefore, because they were still busy collecting treasure, Moshe had to say, okay, enough collecting treasure, it's time to move on. And the interesting question is, wait a minute, if there was money sitting there lying around, why is Moshe in a big rush, right? Well, that's the first question we ask. Why is Moshe in a big rush? So the Kleyakar wants to try to address that. Vayasa Moshe Yisrael, the Kleyakar says the following. Perish Rashi explained, Vayasa Hisiam Bal Korcham, as we just said, that he made them go unwillingly, against their will. They didn't want to leave from collecting. They were still collecting stuff. There was still plenty of stuff to collect, it seems, according to the Midrash. That Moshe, if there had been nothing left, Moshe wouldn't have had to schlep them away. They would have said, okay, we've nothing left to collect. Obviously, there was still more to collect if Moshe has to forcefully remove them, according to this Midrash. Moshe was concerned. Having too much money was going to be too much of a test for them, and it would bring them to sin. Very, very interesting perspective on that. Now, remember, you have to understand, if you look at Jewish history, you'll find we have lots of tests. Tests are often because we're very poor. Tests are often because we're very rich. And the Kleyakar says, and what's the proof that being rich is always a problem? If they hadn't had all that gold, where would they have made the golden calf from? So obviously the problem of having too much money had nothing to do with their money. So they decided to make a golden calf. Al-Kaini Siyam Bar-Korcham. There Moshe said, okay, you collected enough, it's time to move on. Even though there's more to collect, forget it. We're moving on. The Ode, however, Kleyakar gives another very interesting, different reason. Besides the fact that the gold would lead them to sin, he gives a very interesting second reason. The Ode, another thing. Chashav Moshe sheriboy ha'osher yiyasibo l'shalo yihu re'uyim l'kabel ha'torah. A person who is busy collecting money, that's a reason why he will not be able to fully receive and appreciate the Torah. He had Torah osher barchim me'ezeh mizeh. Riches and Torah generally, not always, but generally run away from one another. They are rivals one to another. Kemoshe Nemar, as David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Tovli ki uneti. It would better for me to be poor, in order that I would be able to learn your statutes. Al Kain, therefore, Moshe decides it's time to keep them moving on, because what is happening? Remember, they've lived their entire lives as slaves. They finally see a chance to acquire something, and they get carried away. And Moshe is very, very concerned, and therefore he decides it's time to move on. I think there's a very, very powerful lesson in this Kleyakar about, because we often, Tevye is the what's the word, role model for every Jew. If I were a rich man, if only I had a little bit more money, everything would be fine. Okay, and we have to understand that we have exactly what Hashem wants us to have. We don't need more, we don't need less, but we don't need more. We don't need to be chasing after wealth in a way that we become obsessed with wealth, and we substitute wealth for happiness, for meaning in life. That's a very, very powerful lesson from this short little pasuk of the fact that it says that Moshe had to make them travel, had to schlep them away from Yam Suf. Okay. Now, the pasuk then continues that they traveled for 3 days. What does that mean, that they traveled 3 days and they couldn't find water? Medrash says the following. Dorshe Rishumot, those that try to understand the depth of the text rather than just take it all at face value. Amru, they said the following: Torah, that doesn't mean that they went for 3 days without physical water. On one sense, that yes, it does, but that's not the only meaning. They separated themselves from words of Torah for 3 days. How do we know that Torah is compared to water? Because this hoy called samelu fulamayim. Yeshayahu says, "Whoever is thirsty, go to the water." Here, the reference is to the water of Torah, and they separated from learning Torah for 3 days. Gimel yamim. The fikach. It's very interesting to ensure that that never happens again in history. That we leave the Torah for 3 days. The fikach itkinu neviim uzikenim sheyukorim b'sefer Torah b'chol shavua gimel yamim. That there are 3 times a week that we read from the Torah publicly in Beit Knesset, Korim b'Shabbos, umafsikin echad b'Shabbos. We take a day off on Yom Rishon, on Sunday. With Korim b'Beit, we read the Torah on Monday, umafsikin Gimel v'Daled. With the Tuesday and Wednesday, we take off from reading. With Korim b'Chamishi, we read on Thursday, umafsikin b'Shishi. We can stop to read on the normal Friday. Shelo yiyu shloshet yamim li'olam b'li Torah, that we should never go 3 days without a public reading of the Torah, to remind us of this fact that a Jew living without Torah is like a person living without water. It's a very, very very powerful perspective if we take it to heart. Okay, back to the Kliyakar on this concept of the 3 days now. They went 3 days without water. What is that? Why did they have to go 3 days without water? Mida keneged mida. We know that Hashem always deals with the individual and with Klal Yisrael measure for measure. What does that mean? They spent extra time, more time than they were supposed to, collecting the spoils at the sea. Therefore, they were no longer immediately prepared to receive the Torah. They were supposed to cross the sea, walk to Har Sinai, get the Torah, get to Eretz Yisrael, inherit Eretz Yisrael, and that would have been it. And Mashiach would have been here. We wouldn't have to go through this 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 year detour that who knows how much longer it'll be. Okay, this is what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to cross the Yam, go directly to Sinai, do not pass go, do not collect 200, no problems, and everything would have been fine. But once they stopped and collected all this money, this jewelry and stuff from the Yam Suf, they were no longer worthy to immediately walk, march, and receive the Torah. Shenim shalul amayim, which is, as we talked above, was compared to water. Al kainenshu, therefore their punishment was mashalo matzu mayim. They did not find any water. So since they weren't looking for Torah, they couldn't find physical water. Zeudat Chazal, and that's what the medrash that we just quoted above. Ubali safek, and he says it's certain. Doesn't mean that the lack of water is a lack of Torah. It doesn't mean that was the only problem. In other words, it's not meant only metaphorically. It's meant, yes, there was no water. There was no physical water. Not just that the metaphorical Torah was missing. Why? Because if only the metaphorical Torah was missing and that was all they needed cure, then what good does it do that Moshe threw a tree into the water and cured the bitter water? That was talking about physical water. Elisharatzu Lomar, what this Torah wants to teach us, al yidei shayasukim bevizav lo miharu leilech el hamidbar makum kabbalat Torah, since they weren't anxious and rushing to get into the desert to receive the Torah, al kainenshu shalomatzu. Therefore, their punishment was that they couldn't find any ordinary drinking water. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu had already told them before they left Egypt. He had told Moshe at the burning bush, that your job when you take the Jews out, you're going to come directly to Har Sinai. You're going to serve Hashem there. Tainu Kabbalat Torah, which is accepting of the Torah. However, since they were so busy collecting the spoils, they didn't say, let's run and go get the Torah. And he gives another example where the Jews, again, were not rushing to get the Torah. Again, why is the place that they that they didn't have water later in the parsha called Rifidim, Sharafu Yadam. Their hands became weak from Torah, or they stopped focusing on the important spiritual values, and they were too focused on other things. And there also same problem occurs. There was no water. So again, we stop learning Torah, we have problems with water. Very, very interesting perspective on how we, the Jewish people, relate to the physical world. And if we think about it, we say that every day. We say it every day in Kriyat Shema, in the second parsha of Kriyat Shema. What do we say? If you follow the mitzvot, it will rain. Now, what does rain have to do with keeping mitzvot? Torah is compared to water. How do we get our water? We get our water from rain. And again, what happens if we don't follow the mitzvot? Stops raining. Eretz Yisrael is a place that's very dependent on rain. And again, this whole concept of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu being in through the Torah, which is compared to water, really focuses us on this fact that nature, as we look at nature and the way Hashem has created the world, there's no rational reason why whether we keep mitzvot or not has anything to do with what goes on in terms of the weather. But it does, because that's what Hashem wants us to understand, that Hashem controls the world, and the Jewish world, not like the Goyish world, but the world of the Jewish world is focused on our observance and our actions in terms of how we relate to God's world in order for God's world to relate properly to us. I think it's a very, very, again, another important message from this very short parsha. Okay. Rabbeinu Chaya elaborates even further on this whole concept of the relationship of the Jewish people and God and the purpose of this traveling through the desert once they've left Egypt. Okay? Rabbeinu Chaya says, they went 3 days in the desert. I already mentioned above. Every activity, mipulot hamidbar, that happened, and the things that are described as occurring in the desert, in the Torah, hayat nisayon gamur, was completely and entirely, fully, nothing more than a challenge to the Jewish people. And nisayon, again, we've talked before about the word nisayon. Nisayon often is translated a test, a challenge, but Hashem basically is giving us the opportunity to strengthen our faith and to prove that we will trust Hashem. In order, they're traveling through the desert. They're in the middle of a desert with their children, their wives, their children, their families. The Amdam believe Mayim Shlosha Yamim, and going for 3 days without water, these manakayits in the middle of, it's not the rainy season, it's the middle of it's Pesach, it's already beginning of the summer, beginning of the spring, Lefachot. Ein ba'olam nisayon kazeh. We cannot find a more challenging thing than going 3 days without finding fresh water. Kasher bo Marata, when they arrived at Marata, Amru Chazal, the Chacham say there's a problem with this question. Ki hayu hamayim mitukim v'nimmeru. That before the Jews got to Marah, this was a perfectly normal spring of water. When the Jews got there, it suddenly became bitter. Why? All of this was part of the test. Ukinyan shenemar, as it says, v'sham nisaw, at the end of the parsha, there God tested them. So the point is that, by the way, this is not the opinion of every one of the parshanim. There's a machloket in the parshanim. Was the water always bitter until Moshe took the water? Was it started out fresh and became bitter? Great question. Will we ever find the answer to that? No, unless you're able to travel back in time and visit the spring before Bnei Yisrael got there, you won't know the answer to the question. Isn't there somewhere in that, David says, isn't this generally in the area of the Great Bitter Lake? It's entirely possible. But again, that could be post this story that it's the Great Bitter Lake. It was once Moshe threw the tree and it came sweet, but it didn't stay sweet. Once the effect of that tree wore off, it went back to being bitter again. Okay? Yeah, bitter is salty. Yeah, but it's not potable. It's not drinkable water, no matter whatever we call it, whatever the terminology is, okay? But what Rabbeinu Bachai says is the whole purpose of arriving at this place where they find this water that they can't drink is a test. Now, when Moshe davened to Hashem, the hishlich davar mar b'mayim. Now, the tree that Moshe threw into the water, again, Rabbeinu Bachai is going on again, but among the parshanim, was it a sweet tree that made that quote naturally made the water sweet? Or was it a bitter tree that miraculously turned the water sweet? Great question. Rabbeinu Bachai is going on the second opinion that this was something bitter that Moshe threw into the water. And they returned to their sweetness. In other words, there was water that was not drinkable. Moshe takes something that ordinarily would make drinkable water non-drinkable. And what does it do? It makes this non-drinkable water drinkable. So it does the exact opposite of what we would have expected to do. We would have expected if I throw something bitter or non-drinkable into something non-drinkable, it would make it even more non-drinkable. It wouldn't suddenly turn it around and make it drinkable. Okay. All of this is to accentuate the test. Midat habitachon, to instill into their intelligence of their soul. In other words, this was supposed to be a teaching lesson, a lesson to teach them to have faith in God, that God can do whatever He needs to do to take care of you, and you have to have faith that God will take care of you. So it's not something that you can physically understand; it's something you have to intellectually understand, and that's exactly what the purpose of this test is. It's to intellectually force them to think about their situation. Remember, they've just left Egypt. They're traveling with nothing but whatever they were able to carry. They're not traveling into an inhabited, fruitful land. They're in the middle of a desert. There's nothing there. So the fact is they have to rely on God for all of their needs. This concept of God putting obstacles in their way to see how well they're going to respond when those obstacles are there is the purpose of this whole travel. And that is why the agent that was used to turn the water to be drinkable water had to be something that in and of itself would not naturally have made the water drinkable. If it had been something that naturally would have made the water drinkable, they would have said, "Oh, Moshe was great. He's a good chemist. He knows the water chemistry. He got the right substance to throw in, and it worked." That can't be the case, because that would defeat the whole purpose of the test, which is to increase our awareness of the fact that God is there keeping an eye on us. It's not that Moshe is a great chemist, botanist. He knows where all the water is hidden which rock has water hidden in it. That's not the point here. The point is that all of this is provided by Hashem. And that's why it has to be something that ordinarily would have had no positive effect on the water. And that's why it's a nes b'toch nes. Within the miracle of Moshe having to have the right substance on hand to make the water drinkable, it happens to be something that would not have made the water drinkable. So it's not only is there something available to make the water drinkable, but it's something that ordinarily would not have. That's this concept of nes b'toch nes, that they will be fully aware that this is not teva, this is not nature operating. It's not that Moshe just happens to know his desert survival skills. This is God specifically and directly protecting and providing for them. That's why Chazal had to say it's not that it's Vayoreu Hashem eitz. It's not Vayir Ehu. Not that Hashem showed him a tree. Oh, yeah, this tree, you know that tree, Moshe, you know that's the right tree. No, it's Hashem taught him about a tree that would miraculously change the water. Now the Gemara he brings down there were three different opinions in the Midrash. One says it was a hirdofni. Don't ask me what a hirdofni is. What Elazar Modai says it was an eight zayid. It was an olive tree. V'yesh omer mikarei te'ena. And others say that it was a roots of a fig tree that was put into the water. Whatever the botanical species is not the issue here. The issue is that it would not have worked naturally. That's the point. Mikol makom. Bain Lamar, Bain Lamar, Marhoya. Every opinion cites something that in and of itself was something that was bitter. The botanical substance that Moshe threw into the water was something that was bitter, naturally would not have made the water sweeter. It only made the water sweet because Hashem was performing a miracle. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, to accentuate this point, says the following: we see how wondrous are God's deeds, how much greater are they than the deeds of humanity. And because we find similar, we have a very similar story in the Navi, where the students come to Elisha and said, the water has poison, there's something wrong with the water, we can't drink it, somehow our water supply has become poisoned. And what does Elisha say? Take a new, give me a new glass jug, and put in it salt. Again, similarly, in the case of Elisha, what does he do? He throws salt. Now you take water and salt, it's no longer drinkable if you put too much salt in it. He throws a whole container of salt into the water, it's not going to make it drinkable. Again, purpose is to show that it's not the salt that makes the water sweet, it's Hashem that's making the water sweet and drinkable. So again, we see a similar miracle there. Now, a very interesting thought. It says that they traveled for 3 days and they couldn't find water. Now, 3 days travel without water would be a rather strenuous directive. So it's interesting because it brings down the Klayakar brings down Rabbeinu Hananel. The fact that they traveled 3 days in the desert doesn't really mean it was 3 days. It wasn't 72 hours that they went without water, because that would have been rather challenging. It was a 3-day journey, but Hashem miraculously helped them travel 3-day journey in 1 day. Again, what's the purpose of traveling a 3-day journey in 1 day? Not to make everybody exhausted from the travel, to show that Hashem is miraculously moving them to Har Sinai faster than they can make it on their own. It's because he wants to give them the Torah. In other words, Hashem is helping them along the way. They were missing water for only that 1 day. Even though it was a 3-day journey, it was only 1 day of travel. And how does he say that? And the reason it has to be that they traveled this whole distance in 1 day, because it is impossible for a person to go 3 days without water. Because certainly there were pregnant and nursing women among the travelers and children. There's no way they could have survived for 3 days. And that kind of challenge was not what Hashem would have given them. But Hashem gave them tests that he gave them the ability to overcome, and they needed to rise to the occasion. But again, Rabbi Hananel wants us to understand that it wasn't 3 days without water, because that would have been too much to withstand. Okay. They come to Marah. And again, Klayakar very similarly tells us that the whole purpose again of arriving at Marah, lachzor v'lasot bahem misayon im ha'yiyu re'uyim lekabalat haTorah. The whole purpose of this test is to see, is their faith strong enough yet that they're ready to receive the Torah? Okay, and again, now he brings down a different opinion. We brought down the 3 different opinions of what type of herb it was, but Rabbi Shimon Yochai says midrashically, okay, that what happened here at Marah had nothing to do really with water. It really didn't. He's going to go a step further. He says, what is it that with this whole business of he showed him a tree, davar min haTorah herahu. He showed Moshe some teachings from the Torah. Shenemar, why? How do we know what's the tree? How do we know the Torah is called a tree? Because it says Eitz Chaim Lamachazikim ba. Torah is the tree of life. Ubi'er ha'inyan. And what happened here at Marah was the following: Torah, Hashem wanted to explain a principle of the Torah to the Jewish people. The Torah, Chilata Marah. At the beginning, the Torah can be bitter. The Nigrate Tushia. It's called tushia, which we translate often as understanding or wisdom or whatever, but it's really tushia means weakness. It weakens a person's strength. In other words, it requires all of our energy to study Torah. If you really want to immerse yourself in Torah, it takes a lot of energy. Chazal Amru, Lama Nimshla Torah Lezayit. Why is the Torah compared to the olive? Mazayit Zeh, just like the olive, Tfilato Mar V'Sofa Matok, just like in the beginning, it's bitter. If you take the olive right off the tree, it's very bitter, but after a while, Sofa Matok, it sweetens up. After every Torah came, the same thing with the Torah. The purpose of mitzvot is not for our enjoyment. The purpose of mitzvot are to show that we accept God's sovereignty. As we similarly see when they came to Matan Torah, it says, "V'taged livnei Yisrael," that you should relate to Bnei Yisrael, not Tomar. You should tell them, because Taged means Dvarim Kashim Kigidim, things that are hard, harsh things. Ki chole hanefesh, kimo chole haguf. A person who is spiritually ill has the same type of trajectory as a person who is physically ill. Most physical ailments are healed through medicines of herbal medications, herbs that are bitter. You take bitter herbal supplements to cure you. If the person who is ill doesn't trust the doctor who's prescribing the medication, he will refrain from taking the appropriate medicine. Similarly with spiritual illness. The Jews were spiritually ill because of all the spiritual illnesses they had acquired in Egypt, all of the bad habits and bad practices that they had seen in the Egyptians that they had adopted. They had to remove themselves. They had to rid themselves from it. Hashem wanted to heal them of their spiritual maladies through the Kabbalat HaTorah, the acceptance of the Torah, which is compared to a zayit, Kireshita, at the beginning, marak zayit. Because when you first are introduced to Torah and you look at and you realize that there are all these things you can't do, and you don't realize, well, but there's a reason. These are all going to strengthen. They're all good for you not to do them. You don't realize that right away. Your first instinct is a childish instinct to say, I want to do, I want freedom, I want to be able to do whatever I want to do. It's only later on that with maturity, with aging, comes the sweetness of Torah, and you realize the beauty of Torah. And it is possible that when the Jews are going to be introduced to Torah, they're going to say, wait a minute, how can we heal our spiritual bitterness with something that's bitter? The Torah that we have is bitter. Therefore, Hashem taught them through this lesson of these bitter waters at Marah, that became sweet again through something that was not sweet. And through this, the challenge is, are the Jews going to understand and believe that what Moshe did was not natural, it was miraculous, it was done through the power of Hashem? Then, if they can believe and trust that Moshe did this with Hashem's power, then they will believe that the Torah has the same healing spiritual power over the long term, and they will accept the Torah. But if they should say that Moshe was just a good guy, he knew his desert sciences. They will not be able to receive the Torah because they will say, oh, Moshe just knew the right combination of things to do. They will miss the whole lesson of this thing. Therefore, the Torah pasuk is by Yorehu Hashem ate, that Hashem taught him about a tree, that he showed him a tree. Through the Torah, Hashem taught Moshe about this tree, and through this tree that is healing the water, the people are supposed to learn the lesson that the Torah is going to heal them. Very interesting. Okay. The reason he should take a tree. The reason he has to take a tree, the reason the Torah calls what he took a tree is to remind us, we who are reading it, who didn't see what happened, to remind us of the Eitz Chayim, the Torah that is called Eitz Chayim. Okay. All right. The rest of this is just repeating the whole thing. Okay. All right. Okay. Yisrael. And when they did accept and believe, when they realized, when the Jews realized that this was not something that Moshe did naturally because of his own knowledge of the desert, they reached a level of belief in Hashem. Al Kain, therefore, therefore, after that time, the pasuk ends with the Sham Samlo Choku Mishpat, that there he added laws and statutes to them. What were they? Some mitzvot, Shabbos, Paraduma, V'dinim, V'kibud Avaim. Rashi quotes different midrashim that quote 2 of these, 3 of these, 4 of these. But Shabbos, the little mitzvah of Paraduma, the mitzvah of having courts, and the mitzvah of Kibud Avaim. These are the 4 mitzvot that are connected to Marah that were given there. Ki mitzvot Eila. Why specifically these 4 mitzvot? Ki these 4 mitzvot Yeshlam Yaches Im Ze'amaseh. Each of these are somehow connected to this lesson that this whole story is supposed to teach us. Ki al Yidesh Yaminu B'nei Seh Yaminu Gam B'chidush Ha'olam Asher Shabbat Moreh Alav. What's the connection between Shabbos and Marah? That Marah teaches them that Hashem controls nature. Hashem is the one who controls the ability of this water to be bitter, the ability of this water to be sweet, just like Hashem renews the world every week. And Hashem created the world, which is exactly what Shabbos teaches us. So therefore, by learning this lesson of the water, they were ready to accept the lesson of Shabbat, that Hashem is the creator who creates and renews the world all the time. Because this nace is close to the concept of creation from nothing. Because the water became sweet not through putting a sweetening agent in it. So in other words, the sweetness was created from nothing. There was no sweetness to create the sweetness. Therefore, the sweetness is similar to the creation of the world, where there's something is created from nothing. The only way the water became, as we said, the only way the water became drinkable was through the words of Hashem. Why is that related to Shabbos? That's why it's related to Shabbos, because it relates us back to creation. Kibud Avaim. Kibud Avaim, honoring our parents, is also very similar to the Shabbos. The reason that Shabbos and Kibud Avaim are next to one another in the Aseret HaDivrot is because these are 2 very closely related mitzvot. And similarly in parshat Kedoshim, we have the same concept, Ish Imo V'Aviv Tirovi Shabtotai Tishmaru. Again, in the same pasuk, we're talk about awe for our parents, respect for our parents, and honoring the Shabbos or keeping the Shabbos. Karov Elai, and why is it? What's the relationship between Shabbos and honoring our parents? Lomar shutafim bi'adam. There are 3 partners in every person's creation except for Adam. Hakadosh Baruch Hu v'aviv v'ima. Parents who provide the physical, Hakadosh Baruch Hu provides the spiritual. Al kain siva al kibud shloshtam yachad. Therefore, the honor of all 3 of the partners in our creation is joined. By honoring Shabbos, we honor Hashem, and right after we read about honoring Hashem, we read about honoring our parents. Why is Shabbos? Now, why is Shabbos, honoring Shabbos, the same as honoring Hashem? Shabbos is the sign of Hashem's renewal of the world. We also realize that Hashem, once we accept Hashem as the creator, then we go back to the creation story where we know that the physical human being is created from the ground, but the Spirit, who breathes the Spirit into him, Vayipach bi'apav nishmat chayim. Hashem is the one who breathed the Spirit of life into humanity. Once we've created the first person, the continuing creation of humanity is in the hands of humanity, not in the hands of Hashem. But that's also the secret of the neshama yisera that we get on Shabbat if we observe Shabbat. V'raya ledavar, and the proof of this is that these two mitzvot were given at Marah, both Shabbos and Kibud Av Va'em were given at Marah. The proof of that is because in the Divrot Achronot, when we read in Be'et Hanan, the second version of the Aseret HaDivrot, both of these mitzvot of Shabbos and Kibud Av are followed and concluded with the words Kasher Tzivcha Hashem Elokecha, as Hashem has commanded you. And obviously, when did Hashem command the Jews with mitzvot? Prior to the giving of the Torah, as you were commanded at Marah. So therefore, we see from the words Kasher Tzivcha Hashem Elokecha, that refers to that Hashem taught us these mitzvot at Marah. And if we take the last letters of each of those four words, the Reish from Kasher, the Chaf from Tivcha, the Hey from the name of Hashem, and the Chaf from Hashem, it actually equals the same numerical value, 245, as the word Marah. So it's hints to the fact that where did Hashem command us this? At Marah. Hisham nitztav oleihem. The hapara v'adinim. Now, okay, that's nice. We talked about two of the four mitzvot. The other two are hinted to. Remuzim v'mashem chok umishpat. What is chok? Chok refers to chukat hapara, the chok of the paraduma. Umishpat refers to dinim, that we have to have courts of law. V'ramaz v'dvar ve'ela mishpatim asher sof tevot marah. Again, similarly, ela mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. The first three words of the parsha that deals with civil law. Ela mishpatim asher is again the same last three letters spell out the word marah as an anagram. Hey and reish spell out marah. Upara asher ein bamum, again remez likach mem min hapara az yisher marah. Para does not have a mum. It hints the fact that if you take the mem 40 away from the word para, you'll be left again with the same 245 that equals marah. The altispal shenichtav mum bevav. Don't worry about the mum and the vav. Okay, so we talk about, again, interesting that he connects each of these mitzvot back to marah. Okay, we'll skip the rest of this. Again, all of these, what's the purpose? They will no longer be afraid of mitzvot that they can't fully comprehend. Paraduma is very similar to doing something that's contra-intuitive. It's contra-intuitive to expect bitter water to become sweet by throwing something bitter into it. It's also counterintuitive. Paraduma, we know, makes tameh the pure people who are involved in dealing with it, but the whole purpose of the paraduma is to bring purity to those who become impure by contact with the dead. Okay, and what about dinim? Again, by understanding courts, I'm going to just skip it because my time is already getting late. Basically, the purpose of dinim, the last of the four mitzvot that we talk about it here at Marah, is to teach us the concept, just like we have to have courts in the human world, so too Hashem has courts in the heavenly world, and we ultimately are going to be accountable for what we do and achieve in this world. And I think that's the whole lesson here of the parsha of Marah, that when we think we can do it all on our own and we forget about Hashem, we are treading on thin ice, and we're obviously ultimately going to get into trouble. That we have to, as the Jewish people, we have to remember always that our existence on a day-to-day basis and on a national basis throughout history is dependent on our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on our acknowledgement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the one that provides for all our needs, even though we don't necessarily see it. But that's the whole lesson here of this parsha, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu oftentimes, in miraculous ways that are hidden and unknown to us, provides it. It's interesting because at the parsha that immediately follows this in the Torah is the parsha of the man, which teaches the exact same lesson in the exact opposite way, that just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu can provide bread from the heavens and water from the ground, so too, and that's miraculous, so too, when Hashem provides bread from the ground and water from the sky, it's just as miraculous. And we can never forget that, or I should say, we shouldn't say we never forget that, we forget that at the risk of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and our awareness of who we are and why we're here and how we're here. So I think that there's lots of powerful lessons in the parsha of Beshalach, because it's the parsha that we're finally left Egypt and we're starting to instill within the Jewish people this awareness of their unique mission and, more importantly, their unique relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when we understand that and we can accept that and live up to the expectation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has us individually and as a nation, then we will be merit to undo the fact that we had taken this so many thousand-year detour in doing exactly what we were supposed to do. Leave Egypt, get the Torah, go into Eretz Yisrael, build the Beit HaMikdash, and usher in the Messianic era. And B'ez Hashem, we will learn those lessons and get there sooner rather than later. Thank you all. Open the floor now for questions, comments, and feedback. All right. Thank you all for joining. And sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I absolutely love your idea that we must realize that water from the skies and food from the ground is just as miraculous as food from the skies and water from the ground. I think that's a lovely idea.
But that's the whole lesson of the parsha of the Man. that okay, because stop and think about it. We are so used to what we call our nature is that water comes from the sky and bread comes from the ground. Imagine the kids who grew up in the desert during that 40 years they were wandering, and they finally get to Eretz Yisrael, and the first day they see rain falling. And they say, what? Rain's not supposed to come. Wow, what a miracle. Rain's coming from the sky. We're used to rain coming from the ground. And then they see the inhabitants planting trees and seeds and things growing from the earth. They say, well, that's not the way we got our food in the desert. Food is supposed to come from the sky, or and fall and be there in the morning, waiting for us. So for them, hafuch, what we think is nature for them was miracle. What we think is miracle was for them nature. And that's why we say both of these are just equally miraculous, and that's one of the lessons of the parsha of the Man and the whole traveling 40 years in the desert. Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the week.